Philadelphia, 1804. A young man sits alone in a room with a small glass vessel on the table in front of him. Inside, it is a dark fluid, almost black, drawn an hour ago from the body of a man dying of fever a few streets away. He takes a lancet, rolls back his left sleeve, and cuts a clean incision into his forearm. Then he lifts the vessel and lets the black fluid run into the open wound. He is not trying to die. He is trying to prove a point, and he has chosen his own body to prove it on. This is his case file. 11 years earlier, in the summer of 1793, a fever had moved through the same city and emptied it. Yellow fever reached Philadelphia in July and held it until the first frost. By the time it lifted, around 5,000 people were dead, close to 1 in 9 of everyone who had not already fled. The sick turned the color the disease is named for, a deep yellow in the skin and the eyes. Then came the black vomit, dark matter, partly digested blood, brought up from the stomach. After that, most of them did not recover. No one knew why. The leading explanation, argued by the most respected physician in the country, Benjamin Rush, was miasma. The belief that disease rose from bad air, from rot and filth and the gas of swamps. The rival idea was contagion, that the sick passed the fever directly to the healthy. The young man with the lancet accepted neither. Stubbins Ffirth was a medical student, barely past 20, and he had noticed something. The fever came only in the heat of summer and vanished in the cold. From that he drew his own conclusion. The disease did not pass between people at all. He set out to prove it on the only subject he could fully control. He began with animals. Ffirth collected black vomit from fever patients and put it into dogs by every route he could devise. He soaked it into bread and fed it to them. He forced it into their veins. One small dog took to the material so readily that it would eat the vomit without the bread. Another died within 10 minutes of having an ounce of the fluid pushed into the vein of its neck. That second result should have stopped him. It did not. The other animals lived, and Ffirth treated the survivors as proof and the death as a fault of the method. After several trials that settled nothing, he set the animals aside. If the point was to show that the fever could not be transmitted, the cleanest subject was the one he could watch most closely, himself. He started with the incision in his arm, filled with fresh black vomit. He waited. Nothing came. He took more of the fluid and let it fall into his own eye. Again, nothing. He was working against a medical world that treated the black vomit as the deadliest material a body could meet. Families left the dying unattended rather than handle it. Ffirth was gathering it by the cupful and carrying it back to his room. He was not a senior physician with a laboratory and a reputation to guard. He was a student, working alone, with no one to stop him and no rule that said he should. So the experiments grew. He poured a quantity of vomit into a pan, heated it, and bent over it to breathe in the rising steam. Then he built something closer to a chamber, a small closed room filled with the vapor of warmed vomit, and sat inside it, surrounded by the smell, waiting for the fever to reach him through the air. It did not. Each empty result hardened him. A man watching for a disease that never arrives will tend to conclude that the disease cannot arrive. Ffirth had designed an experiment that could only ever agree with him. There was also the matter of whom he was contradicting. Benjamin Rush had bled and purged Philadelphia through the epidemic of 1793, and was still the most powerful medical voice in the country. To argue that the black vomit was harmless to handle was to suggest, quietly, that the men in charge had misread the disease. So he went further. He decided to take the material inside his body. He measured out 1/2 ounce of black vomit, fresh from a patient, thinned it with water, and swallowed it. He recorded the taste as slightly acidic. It brought him no pain and no sickness. He drank more and stopped thinning it. He swallowed the undiluted black vomit of dying men and noted no effect beyond the act itself. Then he widened the field. The other fluids of fever patients went onto his skin, their blood, their saliva, their sweat, their urine. He lay down in a bed, still warm from a man sick with the fever, and slept in it. Through all of it, Stubbins Ffirth stayed well. He kept his notes in the flat language of a man recording the weather. There is no fear in the record, and no triumph, only the next procedure, and the result, which was always the same. By his own reasoning, the case was closed. He had taken the black vomit into his blood, his eye, his lungs, his stomach and his skin, the very material the city fled from, and it had refused him every time. In 1804, he gathered his results into a thesis and submitted it to the University of Pennsylvania. The argument was stated plainly in the title, that the fever was of a non-contagious nature. He was about to be proved right and wrong in the same stroke. Ffirth never fell ill because every route he tested was the wrong route. Yellow fever is caused by a flavivirus, an infectious agent that lives and multiplies in the blood. It does not spread the way he imagined his opponents believed. It is not passed by touch, by swallowing, or through the air. It moves between people along a single narrow path, the bite of a mosquito, the species now called Aedes aegypti, which draws infected blood from one person and injects it into the next. That path explains everything in his notebook. A person carrying yellow fever can only pass the virus on during the first days of illness, while it is still abundant in the blood, and even then only to a feeding mosquito, not to another human being. By the time a patient is producing black vomit, the disease has moved into its late stage. The fluids Ffirth was collecting came from men near death, long past the short window in which their blood could infect anything at all. So he was working with material that was, in the only sense that mattered, already harmless. He could pour it into a wound, drink it, breathe its vapor, and sleep in its bed, and none of it could reach him. Because none of those acts is how the virus travels, and because the samples themselves no longer carried a living threat. His central conclusion was correct. Yellow fever does not pass from one person to another by contact. A nurse could sit with the sick and not catch it. The families who fled the dying had fled for nothing. But the reason he was right had nothing to do with his theory. He believed the fever was not transmissible at all, that it rose from heat, diet, and overstimulation, a disorder within the body rather than an invader. The truth sat in a place no one in Philadelphia was looking, not in the air, not in the patient, but in an insect small enough to ignore. He had answered the question and missed the answer. The thesis was published that same year and made almost no impression. Ffirth had proved his point to himself and to very few others. He finished his training, practiced as a physician, and died in South Carolina in 1820, around the age of 38. The mosquito took most of a century to find. In 1881, a Cuban physician named Carlos Finley proposed that yellow fever was carried by a mosquito. He was met largely with ridicule. In 1900, a United States Army commission, led by Walter Reed, tested the idea directly, letting infected mosquitoes bite volunteers. The volunteers developed yellow fever. One of the researchers, Jesse Lazier, was bitten and died of it. The disease that had spared Stubbins Ffirth through every wound, every swallow, and every night in a sick man's bed killed a careful scientist through a single insect bite, almost a century after he first cut open his arm. No one was held to account for his experiments, because the only person he endangered was himself. He was never punished and never vindicated in his lifetime. On the one point that could be tested, he was correct, and wrong about why, in a way he had no means to discover. Stubbins Ffirth swallowed the black vomit of dying men to prove that yellow fever could not be passed between people. On that point, he was right. He simply never learned that the thing he was hunting for had wings. One question for the comments. Where is the line between a brave experiment and a reckless one? And who is left to draw it? The next case on this channel. For decades, the same poison sat in the paint on the walls, the fabric of a fashionable gown, and the tonic on the bedside table. People lived inside it without knowing the word for what was making them ill. This is the sealed ward,